Good morning. Good morning. That was brutal, and it's not even Monday. You can't even use that as an excuse. So first, I want to thank you for the opportunity to visit your beautiful island. It's been fascinating so far. My co-presenter later today, he was giving me tips on where to go, so I'm going to take him up on some of his advice. And I also want to thank you for this opportunity to participate in your conference on a subject of great passion of mine, lean. I have to say that I've been extremely impressed by the people I've met. I delivered 2 workshops earlier, pre-conference workshops earlier this week, and everyone I met, I was very impressed by their experience and knowledge, and most importantly, their interest in the subject of lean. So I thank you again for this great opportunity. My presentation, as Lisa said, is titled Beyond Misery, Inspiring People to Improve Themselves, Their Processes, and Their Organizations. Beyond Misery. This sounds very uplifting, doesn't it? So I promise you that shortly into my presentation, I'll explain where that comes from. It's from a comic strip that I've came upon in the late 1980s. So I'll explain that. So when you think about what is it to be a lean enterprise, I mean, what is it really about? Who would like to throw out some ideas? People ask me, my neighbors at home ask me, what is this lean stuff? It sounds like a diet plan, you know. They don't know what I do. They just know I'm not home very often. So they're just like, what is it you do? So what is a lean enterprise, really? In your own words, anyone? It'll be a long day. What is a lean enterprise? Anyone? Come on. Continuous improvement. That's really what it's about. A lot of times people say waste elimination, and that's a part of it, but I always like it more, this definition. It's really developing a culture of continuous improvement. Oops. And we want to do so by engaging all team members in an organization. That's the real secret. You know, I've taken numerous people. I've never worked for Toyota like my colleague Mike, but I've taken numerous people through Toyota facilities, and they can see the incredible, flow systems and the pristine workplace organization. But what they have been unable to duplicate is really the culture that Toyota's been able to develop in their various operations around the world over decades. So it's really about trying to develop this culture of continuous improvement where all members are coming in thinking, how do we do a little bit better than last week, last month, last year? That's the real key, all right? So my question, we hear this term culture quite a bit. Who defines culture in an organization, in any organization? It could be a sports team, it could be a volunteer organization. Who tends to define the culture in organizations? Leaders do, right? You see it like in sports all the time. A team's not performing very well, they fire the manager or the coach, and they get a new manager or coach in, and the whole attitude of the team can change, and as well as the performance. So what is culture? We throw this term around quite frequently, and fortunately, I'm very pleased to say that most people are beyond the tools in my travels. They understand the tools of lean, and they're really focusing on what they should have been focusing on all along, which is culture. So I looked it up in a dictionary, or Wikipedia, I guess, these days. A set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution, organization, or group. And as you said, leaders define culture. All right, so here's a quote from E.G. Toyota that I stole from one of my colleagues. Spirit creates culture, which in turn creates results. So how do we provide inspirational purpose to people that want to improve every day, every week, every month? That's the challenge that we have, and that's really falls on the shoulders, like it or not, on leaders. Okay? So this also requires an organization that is willing to embrace change, right? Because continuous improvement means ever changing. So humans openly embrace change. They say, come change me, please. That was a joke. Obviously not a very good joke, but it was a joke. We need a laugh track, Lisa, is what we need. So people do not openly embrace change. And you have to ask why. Why is that? Why do people, shy away from change? What do you think? What are they worried about? What's the young boy in the picture worried about? I'm sorry? Failure, right? I think a lot of roads go to the fear of failure. People are comfortable with what they're doing, and they feel that they do it very well. To do something different, they might not be so able or capable. And they're afraid how that might be viewed by their peers, by their leaders. So there's this fear of failure. And this is something, for full disclosure, I'm an old Dr. Deming person, if you know Dr. Deming. So he kind of talked about driving fear out of an organization. That was one of his points, his 14 points, number 8 to be exact. And, I actually had the opportunity to ask him 2 questions before he passed away in around 1993, I think. And I said, I don't understand this drive fear out of the organization. It's not like organizations try to intentionally instill fear. And he says, oh, they do unintentionally. And he gave, myriad examples of how we do that. So I think that's a big part of it. So what we have to do is kind of change that fear of the unknown and the fear of failure to really replace it with like an embracing of curiosity of what can be. That's what I believe. I fully believe that lean, what we are trying to get organizations to do with lean, it really resonates with what basic human needs. I truly believe that. But we have to kind of be sensitive and aware of kind of how humans, work and think, and be able to kind of adjust our approach accordingly to help them along this journey. The human brain seeks certainty. It's actually a lazy organ. I don't know if you know this, if you've been reading some of the current neurological science. Hasn't really changed how we know people learn and how they adapt to change. Now we just understand more how it works. But the human brain tries to conserve energy, and it wants to stay with what is known and familiar. So to change to something different, it requires more effort, and humans and the human brain kind of doesn't really want to do that. So what we want to do, again, is replace this fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, with curiosity. So here's where the title, the origin of the title of the presentation is today. Anyone know Pogo comic strip? It's long past. I'm probably just showing my age. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. I think I came upon this in like 1988 or so, somewhere around there. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. What does that mean? Think about that for a moment. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. So I love to listen to people. I ask them, what is your problems? And people tell you their problems. They just unload on you. Sometimes you wonder, you're maybe the first person that has been willing to listen to them since ever. I don't know. So, and they love to tell you their problems, and I make notes. I write down, where's Lisa? Lisa, what are your problems? And she gives me a list. I write them down. I put Lisa's name next to it. And, so we start getting into, let's try to improve things, what things we want to improve, and I'll start bringing up some of the problems that Lisa had articulated to me. And right away, she's like, oh, no, let's not do anything about that. Right away, the walls go up. Not really, Lisa. She's very open to this. But most people, she's just representing all humans right now. So, the walls go up, the resistance go up, and they're like, no, I don't know if we want to do anything about that. But you complained about it. You said this was a problem. So why won't you, be open to even trying to address it? The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. Right? So think about what that means. People, as bad as things might be, it's known, it's familiar, it's comfortable. To go to something that is unknown, uncertain, it's almost like stepping off a cliff, or I guess in Iceland, a glacier. So, I mean, that's what almost people, their emotions that arise and how strong they are, it's almost like that. Have you ever experienced this? And a lot of times we're not talking about change that we can't change again if it doesn't work. But you think that you're chiseling in stone the change, and it'll always be this way for the rest of our lives, you know. And the reality is, if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Every day in my work with organizations, I reflect on this expression from a comic strip many years ago. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. Another way of putting this is the better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Have you heard of this expression? So think about this. This whole concept of, change and not being willing to change, we've demonized it. We've attached the pictures of the devil to this conversation. So no wonder people don't want to change. So what can we do? How do we get beyond misery and inspire people to improve themselves, their processes, and in turn their organizations? Right? So how do we do that? How do we get people to overcome their fear of change? The first thing we have to do is give people a safety net. We have to give people a safety net. So we have to I believe we have to change our language, the language that we use. Instead of even expressing things like, well, let's try this and see if it works, because what if it doesn't work? Or let's try this and see if it's successful. What if it fails? We have to change our language in order to give people kind of greater comfort that change is okay. So instead of, let's try something and see if it works, how about if we make the expression, let's try something and see what we learn? Everyone likes to learn. So why don't we think in those or speak in those terms? So one of the other questions that I had gotten to ask Dr. Deming was Plan, Do, Check, Act. Everyone should be familiar with Plan, Do, Check, Act. And I was confused by do and act. Sounds sort of like the same thing. And that's when he really, really, really emphasized it's about experimentation and the scientific method. You're not going to, when you make a change, you're not sure it's going to work until you check. Right? So plan, do, check. And if it does work, then you'll act to make standard. If it doesn't work, you try something else. And his whole emphasis was this is about experimentation. And, it's about experimenting smartly. So if you kind of think about people, and ourselves included, we're all people here, are you going to be more receptive to change if you're thinking like, this is it. This is the new standard. If we change this, if it doesn't work, I'm in a lot of trouble. Versus we approach it as an experiment. Well, we'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And only if we prove to ourselves that it'll work, that it is working and giving the benefits to ourselves and our organizations, then we'll act and make standard. Do you think one approach is going to get a different response than the other? I think so. So here's a quote from Charles Kettering. Charles Kettering was head of research for General Motors back in 1920 to 1947. And this is a quote, he says, the biggest job we have is to teach employees how to fail intelligently. How to fail intelligently. We have to teach them to experiment over and over and to keep trying and failing until they find what works. Now, do we approach change that way in our organizations? It's an experiment. We expect to fail. Or do we have that fear of failure, as someone had mentioned earlier, which freezes us, to inaction. We don't even want to even try. It's like stepping off that cliff again. So we've got to change the dialogue. We've got to change the words. And in turn, I think we'll get better results. But I'm not saying do this haphazardly. As Mr. Kettering said, fail intelligently. Right? We want to be smart about it. We want to, affect change in like an experiment, a controlled experiment, and not roll out a change throughout an organization until, we prove the concept. So I use this expression quite often in the last 5 or so years. Let's pilot. Let's try, experiment, narrow and deep. Just pick one little area of the organization. Let's try the change there. If it works, that's going to help us sell it to others in the organization. And if it doesn't work, we mitigate the risk to the organization if it doesn't give us the benefits that we expected. So Charles Kettering understood this 70-some years ago, 70 to 90 years ago. So again, thinking about changing our language from success and failure, and it worked, it didn't work, to what we have learned. I think this is important. And probably many of you are familiar with the story around Thomas Edison when he was trying to invent the light bulb. Someone came and visited his lab in New Jersey, and they said, "You must be very disappointed. You know, you had 1,000 failures in your attempts to design a functioning light bulb." And the story goes that Thomas Edison responded, "No, we now know 1,000 ways not to build a light bulb." So it's really about the learning that goes on. It's not about failure. Failure would be if we weren't successful and we didn't learn from it. That would be a true failure. That would be tragic. But, we can learn through failure. And Thomas Edison understood that as he was inventing a light bulb. What else can leaders do besides provide like a safe environment? They got to lead. They got to get out front and lead. When I was growing up in the General Electric company in the 1980s in their corporate management program, I was introduced to these concepts. The term lean did not exist. We called them world-class enterprise concepts in the early 1980s. And we were expected to go and apply the concepts in any management role that we assumed. And we had a great support group. I had mentors at the local level, mentors at the corporate level, so we didn't get into too much trouble. We can always go for help. And one of the things that I would run into, I would come into a new division at GE, and I would meet with, say, the vice president and say, "Here's some of the things I'd like to do while I'm here." And they would say, go in some corner somewhere and go try some things. And if it grows, we'll do it. They didn't want to lead. They didn't want to get out front and lead. And in retrospect, I was foolish to think that they would. Because again, as we were saying, there's fear of the unknown, fear of the uncertain. And they didn't know what I was talking about. World-class enterprise, what's that? Total quality management, what's that? So they didn't get out front and lead. So I had to do it myself. I went to one of my mentors at the corporate level, a gentleman named Larry Bossidy. I said, "Mr. Bossidy, I don't know what I'm to do." And he says, "You have to coach up. You have to teach up and coach up." And he says, "That should not be a deterrent to you to go apply what you've been taught." It's like, okay. I was young and foolish at the time. What did I know? I was about 23 years old, and it was like, oh, okay, let's go do it. So leaders have to lead. They can't delegate this very important responsibility. All right? Part of what they can do is provide a target or a destination. Humans want to know where they're going. They don't have to know how to get there, but they definitely want to know where we're going. So organizations need to provide that. Leaders need to provide that. So if you think about it, how many people get in a car and have no idea where they're going and just start driving? Raise your hand. You do. You get in a car and have no idea where you're going and just start driving aimlessly. That's fascinating. Can I meet with you afterwards? Did I mention I'm an organizational behavioral science guy? That's fascinating. You have some idea of your destination, no? Well, how far can you go on an island, right? Maybe that's the thing. I don't know. Most people have a destination, and you plug it into GPS, and does the GPS system always have a single path? It offers alternatives, right? And you choose which alternative. That's the way change should work in organizations. Leaders set the destination, unless you're of a different type, and then you let the folks figure out the path of getting there. And that's difficult for leaders because they want to dictate the path. And we're like, no, don't do that. You just set the destination, the target, where you want to go, and then get out of the way. And not totally, but help people and coach them along the path. If they run into any obstacles, maybe you help them figure out how to get around those. Much like a GPS system. But there are multiple paths to a destination. This is something I learned at a young age. A gentleman sat me down. It wasn't even a mentor. Actually, I think he worked for me. And he said, "Drew, you're not very effective at what you do." In hindsight, that was a pretty brave thing for him to say. I think I was his boss. And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, just teach people your methodology, set the destination, teach them the methodologies, and then let them figure out what path to go. And he says, he called that value of self-discovery. And I said, this is interesting. I still remember the gentleman, Gil Zander, 1986, GE Reentry Systems. which I can't tell you what we made. I'd have to kill you if I did. But you can kind of glean it from the term. So I said, well, what do you mean? And he says, people will assign greater value to how they do it and the solution if it's theirs. And there's more than one way that will work. And the way that will work the best, or just will work, is the way that it's their idea and they commit to making work. So I my early education was in engineering, and there was always a right and a wrong answer, you know. And here this gentleman's telling me there is no single correct answer. There's more than one correct answer in the back of the book. And let people figure out the answer, and they will assign greater value to it and be more committed to making it work. Therefore, it will work. So I thought this makes sense, you know. So I started adapting my approach accordingly, you know. So there are multiple paths, and we have to let people kind of figure out their paths without going off the road, you know, going over that cliff. So what else can leaders do? They need to coach. And this is kind of interesting to me because most of the leaders I encounter don't really coach. And I was very fortunate. Again, I grew up in GE's corporate management program, and we had mentors. We had coaches everywhere I went to keep us out of trouble. I always used to joke. And, you know, what I learned is that coaching is not something that comes naturally for a lot of leaders. It's a skill that has to be developed. Do you agree with that? So if you think of some of the great coaches in various sports, you know, they probably learn from someone else. And therefore, coaching is no different for that. So we've got to help folks learn how to coach. Well, we talk about leaders as coaches, leaders as teachers. Well, what should they teach? You know, the best coaches are teachers. I don't know if you agree with that, but they teach. Some of the best coaches, most effective coaches with the best records in history and sports were excellent teachers. Not always the most dynamic leaders, but they were excellent teachers. So what do we need leaders to teach? Problem solving and process improvement. Some form of PDCA, Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act. That's what we should be teaching over and over again as opportunities arise. And with enough repetition, that develops the requisite skills and belief that this works, that PDCA works. And that's something that, you know, I think can only come with repetition and practice. And with enough repetition and practice, people can develop those skills and the belief that problem solving and process improvement is part of their job, and they can be good at it. You know, they can be very, very good at it. Now, a lot of times when I say that, people will tell me, particularly leaders, that's impossible, Drew. You're after some impossible dream. And I usually respond and say, impossible is not a fact, just your opinion. It's just your opinion. But I truly believe this because I believe what we are trying to get organizations to do with Lean, engaging people in continuous improvement, trying to solve problems and improve their processes, there is a basic human need for. And I'm not making this up. If you know Abraham Maslow and his study of the hierarchy of needs from 1943, one of the highest level needs is problem solving and achievement. It's right there in print. You could look it up. Google it. You can Google it. So, but they need help. We got to teach them problem solving methodologies. So organizations, often I get a phone call, and the phone call goes something like this. We've been doing Lean for 3 to 5 years. We can't seem to sustain. And I'll ask some basic questions, one of which is, so what is the standard improvement methodology that you've educated all of your team members and given them sufficient repetitions to apply? And there's usually silence on the end of the phone. They're like, what's that? I was like, well, what have you been doing? 5S. Oh, good for you. You know, we value stream mapping. It's like, but what is your standard methodology of improvement that you've taught all team members and given them sufficient opportunities to apply? We didn't get to that yet. Well, there you go. It might be part of the reason why you're not able to sustain. They haven't set that as their destination. They have not set their destination as a culture of continuous improvement where all people, all team members are engaged in helping us improve themselves, their processes, and their organizations. So I believe that humans want to learn. Do you agree with that? I don't make this stuff up. Someone much wiser than I, Aristotle, said this thousands of years ago. To be learning something new is the chief pleasure of mankind. I don't think Aristotle had a lot of fun, but but his point is a valid one. People want to learn. People want to learn. It's a sense of growth and achievement. Again, Abraham Maslow explained that to us as a basic human need. So we need to just take that step, and leaders need to take that step. All of us do. To start learning and getting good at problem solving and process improvement. I also believe that this can be fun. And I like to have fun. I thought we were having fun yesterday. I don't know. Did we? I thought so. I think problem solving is fun. Do you think problem solving is fun? So this is how weird I am, right? So I'm on planes a lot, and I always look around. What are people doing on the plane? And I would say about 40% of the people that I can see in eye shot on the plane, which is not too far, but I'll take it as a sample size, people are doing some form of puzzle. Someone's doing a puzzle. It could be a jigsaw or a crossword puzzle or Sudoku or Ken or whatever. They're doing puzzles. How many people here do puzzles? Raise your hand, be proud. Look at the hands. That's about 40%, maybe more, maybe 60. I knew I liked you people. So, why is that? Because we get a sense of achievement with it, a sense of accomplishment. So there's a basic human need for this, and it's fun. It's fun to do these things. So what else can leaders do? They can ask questions, practice the Socratic method. Now, this was something of interest to me a few years ago. A colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, Mike Rother, wrote a book called Toyota Kata. Are you all familiar with that book? So he's an academic and researcher, so it's a big book. But the basic gist of it is, people need to practice the routine or kata of problem solving and process improvement repetitively to get good at it. That's kind of what we're trying to do. And they need help in doing that. So there's two kata, the improvement kata, which is basically directional PDCA, which Deming taught us many, many years ago. And then what was really neat is the coaching kata, the coaching routine, how to help people become good problem solvers. And it dawned on me as I was reading the book for the first time that, we've always encouraged leaders to ask questions, and we never told them what questions to ask. We never suggested what questions to ask. And we'd be like, oh, go ask questions. We'll be there to coach you and kind of point some things out. And what was nice, what Mike Rother did for us is codify those questions to help really hone the mindset to create good problem solvers and process improvement people. So one of the key things for leaders, and this is very difficult to put in practice for all of us, is to ask questions, not provide answers. If I provide you with answers, all thinking stops. All learning stops, all thinking stops. So there was someone in my group yesterday, where is she? She's somewhere. She said, well, just tell me what to do. Raise your hand. Where are you? I saw you earlier. I know you're here. She's hiding. And what did I say? I said, I can't do that. I said, I can't tell you how to do it. You have to kind of figure out, because the reality is, I don't know how she needed to apply the concept that we were discussing at that time. I don't know the circumstances she's dealing with. I don't know her people or policies or her history or culture in that organization. I don't know any of that. Whatever I would say would be wrong. So, but I have great faith that she would be wise enough to figure out how to do it. And I made the comment that if I tell you how to do it, all thinking and learning stops. And that's not what we want. We want to create critical thinkers in organizations. That's what you need to be a good problem solver and process improvement person. So with enough repetitions, and this is another one of my pet peeves, I get that phone call again. We can't seem to sustain. And I'll say, well, tell me kind of what have you done so far? Have you done any problem solving your people and process improvement? Oh, yes, we have. And I'll say, well, what have you done? And they say, well, we have everyone in a Kaizen event. And I say, well, great, that's outstanding. I said, how many Kaizen events would each person have participated in after 2 or 3 years? Well, we're a very large organization, so, probably 1 or 2. Each person has participated in 1 or 2 Kaizen events over the 2 or 3 years. I was like, Really, 1 or 2. And you think that's sufficient to create skill, knowledge and skill of process improvement and problem solving, and create beliefs that this works, that they can do this. We know what it takes to create skill. It's been known for decades. Repetitions, 17 to 27, based on the nature of work. To think that 1, 2, 5 opportunities to be on project teams and doing A3s or Kaizens or some combination of those is sufficient to create the requisite skills, knowledge, and belief is naive. It's just a naive understanding of human nature. So only with sufficient repetitions will this work. And then, after sufficient repetitions, we can take the training wheels off and let people go. But there's a lot of coaching that is needed before that point. Okay? And, but I don't have the time, the leader says, or, some people aren't going to get it. And we have this expression from the lean community that dates back about 70-some years ago. If the student did not learn, the instructor did not teach. So if people aren't, quote unquote, getting it, the leader needs to reflect on their process and their approach and adjust accordingly. And you do have to adjust your approach accordingly. This is a social, a people system. You have to get one-on-one on an individual basis. I always thought that was the most fun part of my job when I was a manager at GE. For full disclosure, I haven't had a real job since 1990. But before that, I thought that was the most important part of my job, was to one-on-one development of another. That's what I was taught. So you got to get personal. You got to get to the individual level, which means you got to kind of adjust your approach accordingly, because I did not know this expression at the time, but I knew it in spirit. If the student did not learn, the instructor did not teach. So we always, us lean thinkers, we're always humble and reflective, and we always look back and say, what could I do differently to get different results? What else can leaders do? All of that is part of developing others. One of my biggest disappointments in working with organizations is the lack of investment in the development of their people resources. Especially when economic times get difficult, that's the first thing that gets cut. Educational budgets, training budgets, and it's like, wow, that's unfortunate. The development of others, that's what leaders need to do. And the reality is we all learn from somewhere. I learned from somewhere, Mike learned from somewhere, we all learn from someone and somewhere. None of us were born this way. The great masters of the past learned from others. Da Vinci studied under Donatello. Michelangelo, there's a great little story about that. I think he was 6 years old. He was removed from his home to go live in the home of a great sculptor, great master sculptor. I might not pronounce this properly, Ghirlandaio, and then later Bertoldo. And he has this supposedly saying that, or expression that he made that is attributed to Michelangelo. If people knew how hard I worked at my craft, they'd be very disappointed. They thought he was just this natural-born artist, and he worked from a very young age, I believe 6 years old, starting from 6 years old, living in the home of masters, developing his craft and his skills. We all had to learn from someone. No one's born this way. That's why I can still remember the names of all those people that were very, very kind to me and coached me throughout my years, not just in GE, but beyond. I still remember them by name. So that tells you how impressed I was that their kindness of helping develop me as not just a manager or leader at GE, but also as a human. So organizations need to invest in the development of their human assets. That means really looking at our selection process of people. One of my favorite areas to work with an organization is in their onboarding process, their hiring and onboarding process. What a great process to work on. First impressions are huge. Most people decide they're going to leave an organization within the first 3 months of employment. That actually is changing with the Gen Yers, the younger folks. It's within the first 3 weeks. They're already deciding they're going to leave. So first impressions are very important. So how do we go and attract and select the quote-unquote right people. How many people here at your organizations have really deliberately looked at your hiring and onboarding process and redesigned it to make it more efficient, not just efficient, but effective? Small percentage. I mean, they don't come much more important than that process. So we need to invest that. And again, we need to invest in education and training in general. And as I said a moment ago, when times are tough, people tend to cut back. So to me, the people assets are the only assets of an organization that appreciate. Everything else, you buy equipment, materials. As soon as you get it into your location, they start to depreciate. So people are one of the few assets of an organization that appreciate. Hopefully you agree with that. So organizations need to see that education and training and development, organizational development is the terminology I like to use, is an investment, not an expense. It's an investment that's going to pay back over and over again for years to come. And I think if we see it that way, maybe we're less likely to cut in this area, which is so important. What else can leaders do? We're not foolish about these things. I think you have to change the expectations of people. You have to be upfront about it. I expect you to not just come in and do your job, but I want you to start understanding that part of your job is to improve. And I don't know if all organizations have made that very clear up front and included that in their performance evaluation systems and other people systems. I don't know if that has been clearly made in all organizations. It's part of their responsibility. It's an obligation that all team members should have and that we all share. So I always encourage leaders to say, expect more than doing the job or running the business if they're a leader. I expect people in general, including leaders, to also make sure that they're improving the business. But if leaders are so busy just getting through the day, running the business, you start talking about, let's improve, the first thing they're going to say is, I don't have any time. So let's start there. And that'll be, I think, part of the subject of the afternoon presentation, right? Finding the time to, see how I worked that in there for you, Mike? Trying to find the time to improve the business because they're so busy just getting through day after day and all the fires and all of that stuff. And, we've got to help them get order to chaos and get them to free up time to be able to improve the business. What else can leaders do? Very basically, summarizing everything I covered, change the way you think, act, interact, make decisions, and communicate. Just no small order there. I never said this would be easy, but you better get started now if you're not acting this way already. This is not an easy task for people to change their habits. I understand that. But only through deliberate practice can we even be successful with it. So the other thing I encourage you to do, and maybe the people that I've met so far here on the island, I think you guys understand this maybe better than other places I've been. Think of people as the organization's most valuable, even precious asset. And if you think of it that way, you want to help them. You want to coach and nurture them so they can grow as a person, to improve themselves, their processes, and their organizations. And lastly, a quote from Sir Edmund Hillary, "It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." So again, there's no other way to kind of do these things but to go through and practice. And I always like to leave, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a Demon disciple from way back. And I always like to leave such groups with this thought. You don't really have to do any of this. Survival is not compulsory. That's what Dr. Deming used to leave with his groups. So thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you and to share a little bit of what I've learned over 30 years. I'm still learning. I think we all are learning. But hopefully you got some benefit out of our discussion today. So thank you very much.